right, friends, good morning. I can't believe there are fewer people here for this than for the election talk 2 weeks ago. Anyway, kidding. With whom? Who are they? Kidding. But welcome, and I know more people watch this by video than come, so welcome to you who are seeing this online at some point. And I'm honored that you would come, and I've signed some books, and I'll do some more later if you'd like to do that, although I'll tell you a story that may influence whether you actually want that or not. So for years, I've done handwritten notes. I write a minimum of 3 a day. Over 10 years, that's like a lot of notes. So I send notes, and I've discovered other very sharp professional people do the same thing. It's one of the reasons that I do it. And one who did that all the time was Jerry Richardson, who owned the Carolina Panthers. He would write me notes. I'd write him notes. And we had dinner one night, and he said, I've been meaning to tell you this. He said, those notes that you send to me in Roslyn? I said, yeah. He said, I can't read them. He said, I'm sure they're well-intended, though, so thank you for that. His handwriting, not much better. Anyway, it's an honor to, have a book, be able to sign a book. Thank you. I've seen signed books with affectionate messages to someone in used bookshops. You have to think about that. So it happens. It's fine. People get hard up for money. They got to sell the book. Anyway, so books. I'm a little surprised that I'm a writer or a reader because when I was growing up, I grew up in a household that had no books whatsoever. My mother read her Bible some, but besides that, I never saw her reading a book. I never saw my dad read a book. We didn't have books. I got through high school, even college, without really reading books. I never read Moby Dick or The Scarlet Letter or all those books. I got the Cliff Notes and skimmed those and was smart enough to slide by. Even in college, I majored in chemistry and physics, didn't have to read a lot of books. So I was not a reader until I got to seminary. And when I got to seminary, there was a lot of reading. And I loved it. And I kind of fell in love with reading. And there's a point for people. It happens. It's sometimes how I know somebody wants to go into the ministry. There are a lot of people, they look at their minister and they think, I really like him or her. But then occasionally somebody looks at them and they think, I want to do that, right? So I loved books, but at some point I started thinking, I want my name on one of those. I want to do that. This particular topic, by the way, the best thing, I wrote a number of books that never got published, thanks be to God. They were not very good. Finally, in 1998, I got my first book out. I thought it was okay. The best part of it was that I got a dedication page, and I wrote just a fabulous dedication to my bride, Lisa. It was like the best part of having a book, is she got to open that and read it. Wasn't that cool, darling? She's thinking, what did it say? So, that was great. This particular book really has grown out of, tell you how this came to be, and that's not advancing, Chad. Yes. That's me, it's a little one. This is in Charleston. You may recognize the location. I've always had sort of some wanderlust, and I think I came by it honestly. When I was a little kid, my parents had all kinds of issues. Wound up divorced, remarried, divorced. It was a mess. But my dad loved to put us in the car and go somewhere, and we were always taking trips somewhere to historical sites and so on. It was great. I'm going to get this going. That's me. I just thought you'd just want to see how cute I was. It's gone down since then. This is me and my sister Jan, of course, at Mount Vernon before it got all commercialized. You can't just walk up to Mount Vernon nowadays. I think the real wanderlust, though, came from my father. My father was in the Air Force, and he would leave for weeks and months at a time. He would come back, and he would bring coins and stamps from wherever he had been. And he flew to places, this is hard to believe, back in the day, like Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Greenland and Vietnam. And I think it just fired my imagination. I thought, man, I want to do that one day. I want to be, it's just slow when it advances. Is that the story? Yeah, okay. All right, there's my dad with some of his guys. I don't know how I came to have these photos. So my dad traveled a lot, and I wanted to travel, and so as soon as I could afford it, I started traveling some, but I couldn't afford it for a while, except I discovered a way that I could afford to travel would be to take groups places. So I started taking church groups places, and a number of you here have traveled somewhere or another with me. I think Liza Zopp gets the frequency prize out of those of you in the room, although others of you have been with me more than once. Got to get these going. First time I ever went to Israel, this is the only photo that I could find from that trip. I'm on a boat on the Sea of Galilee, and I had really dark hair at the time. I don't know what happened. That was great. I loved going to Israel, and I remember I came back, and my poor little country church, I was so excited. I had a slideshow, if you remember slides that people used to have. And I had hundreds of slides that I had taken in Israel, and they dutifully sat through all of that, which was great fun. I discovered then, though, that I loved not just to go to other places, but to tell people about going to other places. And I remember very clearly when I was in Israel the first time, I kept thinking about my grandparents, and I've thought about them every time I've been since then. Mama and Papa Howell, very devout Bible people. They never got to do anything like go to Israel. I used to ask my aunts and uncles, do you know that if they ever left the Carolinas, they're not sure that they ever even left the Carolinas. You could say, oh, poor people. They had wonderfully rich lives. But when I've gotten to go somewhere like Israel, I think about them, how much they would love that trip, how much their imaginations took them there even without going. So this particular book came to be, and years ago, I had a commitment. Sorry, Chad. There it is. I had a commitment to speak to a church in Mississippi, and we couldn't settle on a topic. And finally, the pastor there just said, what do you love to talk about more than anything else? And I said, travel, I think. He said, do something on travel. So I went to Mississippi and did a program that I entitled, Oh, the Places You'll Go, which I thought was fun. And I told them about places that I'd been, but not just places that I'd been, like, isn't it interesting, he got to go there, but why it matters, right? So the premise of my book is the I didn't even hit it that time, and it went. We got slide issues. Location. The location of things matters. The Bible is not like these ethereal truths that they just happen to be true in a vacuum. Everything happened in a real place, on the ground. There was wind or not, it was cold, it was hot, there was dust, it was uphill, and the location really matters. And so the first idea that I got for presenting to Mississippi was I remember taking groups to Bethlehem. This is the Basilica of the Nativity. If you go to Bethlehem today, it's on the West Bank. And we go there, and inside that church, they believe it's built over the site where Jesus was born. It's a lovely place to go and take pilgrims. I started tying this together in my mind with a place in Italy. This is called Greccio, and Greccio is a place that St. Francis of Assisi went to. They built a church since then. Francis went there in the year 1223. There had never, this is hard to believe, there had never been manger scenes in Christianity. We're 1,200 years after, like nobody had thought to do that. Francis went to Greccio, this village in Italy, beautiful place, and created the world's first manger scene. It's a real dramatic story that I wrote about in the book. What's cool about that is that, there we go, artist Giotto painted the scene, is that Francis created the manger scene, and people came with torches, and they sang hymns, and they gathered the cattle, and they gave food to the cattle. And it was really exciting. They had a manger that was set up, and the story is that Francis bent down, and the baby Jesus materialized in that manger. They're like, oh, amazing. So I love going there. I don't know if the baby Jesus materialized. It's a good story all the same. What struck me, though, is that years later, I've read a lot of books about St. Francis. I wrote a book myself about Francis, which is why I read so many books about St. Francis. I read this biography by Chiara Frugoni, and she made a point that I would never forget. She pointed out what I had forgotten, is that when St. Francis went to Greccio and created a manger scene, at precisely that time there were Christian crusaders in the Holy Land trying to conquer the city of Bethlehem. So they're having battles. Christians are battling Muslims in Palestine for possession of Bethlehem. What Francis did is he created a new Bethlehem in Italy, his point being, you don't have to have a war to have that Bethlehem. Bethlehem can be anywhere, right? So I got to thinking about that, and I thought, this is actually true of a lot of places, and it's sort of the premise of my book. So that led me to think about connecting the dots of other places that I've been, both in the Holy Land. St. Francis is especially important to me, but then other places, including in America. So one example from the book is this. Go to Assisi, absolutely beautiful place. I love to take folks there. Hope to do that again before too long. And one of the things that we do when we are there is the city of Assisi, where Francis and the wealthy people live, sits on top of a very high hill. Francis lived there with the other wealthy people, but he was restless, and he wanted to know what God was calling him to do. And so he started walking down this hill day after day. This is, I don't know if you can see how steep that is. This hill is 1 mile straight down that steep. He would walk down that hill every day to a church called San Damiano, which looks like this. And he would go into that church day after day, and he would pray before this crucifix that's still preserved there. And he would pray, Lord, show me your will. Lord, show me your will. I want to know your will. It wasn't make me an instrument of your peace. It was, Lord, I want to know your will. Whatever your will is, I will do your will. What's fascinating about that, that was supposed to go back. There we go. Is Francis would go down that hill every day, and then what did he have to do after he'd gone down there and had prayed for a long time? He had to walk back up the hill. And many of my travelers won't walk up the hill. They can't walk up the hill. There are taxis that are waiting for you to bring you back up the hill. I always make as many people walk as we can. So I started thinking about that walk down the hill and then the walk back up the hill. So the walk down the hill, so interesting. Francis did not hear God's call in his wealthy home. He did not hear God's call in the fabulous churches that were built where the wealthy lived. He only heard God's call when he left that comfort zone and went down to a place where lepers lived. There were pig farms down there. Rich people never, ever went down the hill. They would send servants if something had to be done down the hill. But it was down the hill in that uncomfortable place, in a shabby church that was crumbling at the time, that Francis heard God's call. That says something to me about how you and I might hear God, right? We tend to pray. Where do we pray? In our comfort of our homes. We come to a church like ours that looks fabulous. Maybe you're in a Bible study with other men or women. You probably meet in somebody's lovely home and it's comfortable, or you go to, you see what I'm saying? So we're in comfortable places, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I wonder if we don't hear God's call better if we could get out of the comfort zone and go to difficult places. So that's the premise of my book that I learned on the ground from actually walking where Francis walked. He had to walk back up that hill every day. Once you hear God's call, it's hard to walk back into the world that you formerly knew, right? Because things have changed for you and everything looks different there. So this led me to, I'll skip that one. So this slide, this is Dorothy Counts. She's now Dorothy Counts Scoggins. A friend of Lisa's, and maybe some of you as well, lives here in Charlotte, out near Johnson C. Smith. She's a viewer of our worship services at times. She's spoken here. I had her here a few years back. I don't know if you were here when Dot was with us. Fabulous woman. She was, in 1957, they decided to integrate the schools, and I don't know why they did it this way. They did it this way in Columbia, South Carolina. Remember, they integrated Brooklyn Casey Junior High School. And they sent one black kid in named Billy Chestnut. Why did they send Billy by himself into a school like that? Well, here in Charlotte, it was Dot Counts who was sent alone into a school. And of course, you can see what happened. They were mocking her, and they were spitting at her and throwing rocks at her, and so on. She has lived into the fame of that very well and has been a protagonist for education and civil rights and a lot of wonderful things in her life. What's interesting to me is that this is a photograph that went viral around the world. And one of the people who saw that photograph was James. I need a copy of my book to do this talk. Thank you. James Baldwin. Great writer, novelist, grew up here in the States. He got tired of racial tension here in America, so he went to Paris. And he thought, man, I'll live in Paris. And when he went to Paris, he was regarded as a chic author. He was very popular there. He got out of the racism that he was having to deal with in the southern United States. And he loved being in Paris. If you've ever been to Paris, Paris is so cool, right? I know people that went to the Olympics in Paris. Like, you're in Paris. I mean, what a fabulous place to be. He was living in Paris. I mean, I envy the guy. Like, he got to live in Paris. But then something happened. And that is, he opened the newspaper one day and he saw that photograph of Dorothy Count Scoggins, right? So James Baldwin, like Francis, had come to live in his comfortable place, but he heard God's call because there was a photo that made him uncomfortable. And here's what he said. He kept looking at the photo. He couldn't get it out of his mind. And so he wrote this. There was an unutterable pride, tension, and anguish in that girl's face. It made me furious. It filled me with both anger and pity. And listen to this. And it made me ashamed. Some one of us should have been standing there with her. Someone should have been standing there with her. I dawdled in Europe for nearly another year, held by my private, comfortable life. But it was on that bright afternoon, when I saw that photograph, that I knew I could simply no longer sit around in Paris. Everybody else was paying their dues. It was time I went home and paid mine. I love that, right? So he's sitting around in Paris and loving being in Paris, but God's call calls him to go to a place that is more uncomfortable. So he came home and came to be part of the civil rights movement. Great thing. Thinking of St. Francis, I keep trying to connect dots, and sometimes they get connected for me. My daughter Sarah and I went to Assisi, and she saw all the sites there and all the churches where Francis had prayed and all the dramatic events of his life. And there's sort of I should have had a slide to show you this. There's sort of a cycle of artistic representations of his life, and they show up in churches, and they show up in stained glass. In any church you walk in Italy, they've got all the scenes from St. Francis's life. It's just this pattern. You see it everywhere. From his call, from his father rejecting him, from all these things that happen. And so my daughter and I saw those, and then I had a mission responsibility in Lithuania. And so we went to Lithuania, and we found a church there near this town, and we went in the church, and lo and behold, they had the same stained glass window cycle that you find all over in churches in Italy. This is interesting. It was like St. Francis had come there. And right after that, we met this woman, whom I call the St. Francis of Lithuania. So her name is Regina, and Regina and I are still friends. We talk pretty regularly. I did a little podcast with her. The sound was terrible, but Regina is amazing. She grew up as an atheist in Russia, but her mother was Lithuanian, so then they moved to Lithuania, and she grew up and had never been to church, didn't believe in God or anything, but there were some Methodists there, and she started meeting with the women to cook and sew and do various things. And she started hearing about Christianity, and it's always interesting. Sometimes people who convert late in life, they're really serious about it, right? For them, church isn't like, well, I have a pulse, I'm a Christian, I belong to a church. Like, if they're going to choose to leave atheism and get involved in Christianity, they really do it well. So Regina is just, you would count her, I've told some of you about her before, but it just bears repeating. You would count Regina as dirt poor. My daughter and I stayed in her home with her and her husband. Their house was not the house is about the size of one of our bathrooms here, right? And we're in this house, and I was there 3 days before I realized they did not have running water. Now, how do you live somewhere 3 days without knowing they had running water? They had a toilet that flushed. What I discovered was that her husband, as a show of hospitality to us as Americans, would go down to the creek behind their house, get buckets of water, and bring it and put it in the toilet. You're impressed by that. What you don't know is that her husband had one leg. Another leg was blown off by a mine left over from World War II. So he would, on a crutch and one leg, quietly at night, get this water for amazing people. So Regina's whole life is given over to mission. So she is what you would think of as dirt poor, but she created a ministry to the people that she thinks of as poor. So we're talking really poor people. And so I said, Regina, I want to see where you work. She said, well, we go, it's called the Villages. It's just a rural place where the poverty, the squalor is unspeakable. She said, I go there, I try to bring food, medicine, things that they need. And I told some of you this before, it's kind of funny. I said, well, let's go to the grocery store and load up your station wagon with food for these folks. And so she was just so shy to get much, and we just kept buying and buying and buying. And I was spending your money. I didn't ask you, but I knew you'd want me to. So I used church credit card and just spent a boatload of money for food. And we drive out here, and she begins meeting with various families. So she told me about this woman on the way. She said her boyfriend's no good. That's code language in Lithuania for he drinks too much and is abusive. He's no good. She said, we're going to go, she needs to get rid of that boyfriend. So we go in the house, and Regina, first of all, she puts her finger in the woman's, we bring the food in, and she puts her finger in the woman's face. And I don't know what she's saying. It's in Lithuania. I assume she's lecturing her about the boyfriend. And we finish all that, and then Regina says, let us pray. So we all joined hands, and we prayed, and my daughter took a photo of the prayer. She needn't have hurried. The prayer was really long. I mean, really long and intense. And when it was over, I said, Regina, what were you praying all the time? She said, well, I began by calling down a curse on the boyfriend. I pitied that poor guy, right? And then she prayed for the woman and for her children by name and for their neighbors and all. It was just an absolutely lovely thing. We shot video of her, and the video got lost somehow. I still hate that. But I asked her, I said, Regina, why do you do this? And her answer was, she was puzzled that I would ask such a thing. She said, why do you ask that? That's just what Christians do, right? Now, location matters. This woman inspires me more than anybody I know in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's not to say people in Charlotte, North Carolina aren't amazing people. But I got out of my comfort place to meet someone. And the beauty of this, though, is you may never get to Lithuania and meet Regina, but if you trust me, I can tell you about her, and then you too are inspired, and your life becomes a little bit different. But with the connection that you're really making is through her to St. Francis of Assisi, who really, above all else, was just trying to be like who? Jesus, right? So you're connecting the dots from location to location. I'll skip Moses, talk about him later. I tried another time in another chapter of the book to connect some other dots around the theme of water. And so this is the Jordan River. Some of you have been there with me. People are always disappointed. This is actually more water than often is in the Jordan River. You picture the Mississippi or something, right? People get there and they're always disappointed, like, it's like a little creek. Yeah. So we're in Israel here. The other side of the river, you could wade across. It's about this deep. You could wade across, and that is the country of Jordan. You could actually walk across there and create an international incident, right, just by walking across that little creek. And we go there, and we have a service of renewal of baptism, which is always a meaningful thing. You do kind of get this is kind of things you can share with your Southern Baptist friends, right, who say you have to be dunked under the water. Jesus was dunked under the water. That'd be hard hard to get under that water, maybe. Most likely, John the Baptist reached down and scooped up some water and poured it over Jesus' head. So you have water, interesting. Other things that happened, though, with water, I think what slide is next. I told some of you this, I went to Niagara Falls a while back. A friend of mine moved to Toronto, and he wanted to see Niagara Falls. I wanted to see Niagara Falls, so we drove up to Niagara Falls. And let me find what page this is on in my book. I love this. You know that Abraham Lincoln went to Niagara Falls? And he wrote about it. Now, he's Lincoln, who's more eloquent. Lincoln's more eloquent even than Barack Obama, who's pretty eloquent. If you like the politics or not, you got to admit the dude's a good talker. So when Lincoln went to Niagara Falls, here's what he thought. He was staggered by the amount of water that fell, hundreds of thousands of tons of water per minute. He said there's a corresponding marvel that the sun had to lift just as much weight of water elsewhere through constant, silent, undetected evaporation followed by rainfall to produce such a torrent. Then I love this. When Columbus first sought this continent, when Christ suffered on the cross, when Moses led Israel through the Red Sea, nay, even when Adam first came from the hand of his Maker, then as now Niagara was roaring here, the mammoth, the mastodon, long dead, gazed on Niagara. In that long time, never still for a single moment, never dried up, never frozen, never slept, never rested. What I love about Lincoln there is his ability to look at something. I told this in a sermon recently, so I'm repeating myself. When Jason and I stood there, we noticed people around us had their phones out taking photos and videos of Niagara Falls. And what fascinated me was what they were saying. They were saying things like, wow! Or one guy, he kept shouting a four-letter word that begins with F. He seemed happy with the falls. It was an unusual word choice. And I just thought, do you know what Lincoln said when he saw this? And what does it take for Lincoln to say what he said versus the person who just says, wow? What did Lincoln have to do? He had to ponder it. He had to think about time. This isn't just something that's pretty for us to see now or to post to Facebook. He had to reflect on it. I just love that. So then what I didn't know when I wrote the book, but I wish I had, it would have appeared in the book, is Jason told about our friend, he's died recently, Rabbi Steve Sager, who brought his family to this place, his 4 children. When they stood there, people were also doing the photos. And what Steve and his family did is they simply bowed their heads and they said a prayer that they all had memorized, which is, praise be to you, O Lord, King of the universe, maker of wonders. So you see the difference between, wow, I'll put that on Facebook, versus praise be to you, O Lord, creator of wonders. So how do we marvel over water? There's a church. I had the great privilege of taking our high school seniors last summer to Israel. It's one of the greatest trips of my life, walking around there, reflecting with them. I think many of them would agree that our favorite place is in Samaria. It's on the West Bank. The place that's hard to get there. And it's Jacob's Well. You know the story in John chapter 4? Jesus comes and there's a woman there. It's in the middle of the day, and there's a woman there drawing water. That's the kind of thing you read in the Bible. You don't think about it unless you actually think, okay, there was a well. What happened? What is it like at the middle of the day? Like, you know this. It's hot. Is that a good time to draw water? You can figure all this out yourself. No. Heat of the day, I wouldn't draw water in the morning. I'd draw water when people actually did draw water back in those days, first thing in the morning or at the end of the day. Why did she come in the middle of the day? The Bible doesn't say, but you can guess. She probably didn't want to run into anybody. Why doesn't she want to run into anybody? We learn as the story goes by that she's had 5 husbands, and she's with a man now who's not her husband. So you can imagine if you go in the morning or the evening, the other women are there. What do the other women do? They snicker, they avert their gaze, whatever they do. So she just doesn't want to deal with that. So she's there, and Jesus comes, and it's so interesting. He knows the story about her, but he doesn't condemn her. He doesn't say, "You bad woman, you better behave." He just hears her story, and he stays with her. And then really the most amazing thing is, what does he ask her to do? Do you know this from the story? Do you remember? That what?
Give me a drink of water.
He says, "Would you draw some water from the well for me?" I read that. I never thought about that until I went to Jacob's well. And when I was there, I thought, I'm going to show you what it's like in a minute. I didn't think through that I'm a guy, and if I had been at Jacob's well in the middle of the day and it's hot, I would never have asked a woman to draw water for me. I would say, "Let me draw some water for you," or "Can I draw some water for myself?" But he asked her to draw water for him. If you ask someone to do something for you, what are you saying about that person?
Less important than I am.
You're saying you're important. I trust you. You can do things. You have power. You have ability. So often in church life, what do we do when we see people that are in need? Is we go do something for them instead of saying, "Let me come alongside you. Here's what I believe that you can do." So inside this church is the original Jacob's Well. It's been there all this time, and there's a video. So here's the video of, I wish the sound worked. It's a deep well. It's a deep well. So here's a really muscular man. So it finally gets down into the well, it's got water, and he begins to pull it up. I assume this is a fancier winch than they would have had in Bible times. Look at that guy's arms. And there it comes. And then we all drank from Jacob's well. Now, I'm glad I went there. One, it's cool, like Jacob's well, the water. It's hard to get there. But the effort that it took to draw the water out of that well, and Jesus asked her to do that, that's an amazing thing to me. Absolutely amazing. Bethlehem. So the last example of connecting dots that I've tried to make, the kind of thing that's in the book, Bethlehem. When you go to Bethlehem today, you may have heard about, that's President Trump on there, isn't it? I have all kinds of photos of that. I didn't really notice that one there. They built, to try to keep peace between Palestinians and Israelis, they just built a wall. This seems like a sensible kind of thing. And there's security all along the wall so people can't go from one side to the other. That sounds like a really sensible idea, and it actually has diminished violence in some measure since they've built the wall. The problem is, and again, that's the kind of thing you read about the wall, and you think, that's a good idea that they built the wall. When you actually go into Bethlehem and you see where they put the wall, who built the wall, by the way? This is always how walls go, right? It's the Israelis built. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I'll just state the facts. The Israelis built the wall, not the Palestinians. So if they pay for the wall and build the wall, where do they put it? This is too easy. They put it where it is to their advantage. And when you look at this wall and you walk along the wall, what you discover is they have put it to the maximum disadvantage of Palestinians who live in Bethlehem. So there's a souvenir shop where I took groups for years when we go to Bethlehem. I knew the owner. We'd go in there. I love the owner. First time I walked in, the guy looks at me and he says, "Harrison Ford." Great sales technique. Anyway, and then he's giving out drinks to people. They'll spend more money. It was great. So the souvenir shop, they did a great business, and I knew people in their family and so on. When they built the wall, so let's say the entrance to his souvenir shop is here. It's along a street. They built the wall along this way, and then there was a street going out this way to the main highway, so that's how people got into his shop. Then they put the wall this way, and then behind his shop, they put the wall this way. So it's a big zigzag. The business is closed, right? So you have security, but then people over and over put out of business because of the location of the wall. What's fascinating about this wall, though, is that on the Palestinian side, there's all of this graffiti. I should have had Lisa provide. She took a lot of great photos of the graffiti. Oh, doggone it. I left the slide out. The graffiti is cool. It's all about peace, right? It's got a guy that he looks like one of these war commandos, and he looks like he'd be throwing a grenade, but instead he's got in his hand a bouquet of flowers, right? It's like it's all peace symbols. One of the famous graffiti says, "Make hummus, not war. Make hummus, not war." Arab specialty. So there's all of this graffiti on the wall. So I started thinking about what is graffiti on a wall? If you write graffiti on a wall, what are you doing by doing what is that? That's an act of what? Of what? Protest, but it's a peaceful protest. I wasn't sure what to call it. I kept thinking of different things to call it. And then when we had the teenagers there, we left Bethlehem and the wall and drove directly that day to another wall. So at the site of what would have been the Jerusalem temple, now it's the Dome of the Rock. You have a lot of Westerners call it the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. This is the last part of the wall that still is standing from the time of the temple in the time of Jesus. And so it's sacred to all kinds of people in the world, including Christians, but it's primarily sacred to Jews. And they go there and pray. Back in the day, they didn't have this conservative prissiness has taken over. Men and women could pray together, but then the Orthodox rabbis decided that men could not pray near women. They'd be mad with lust and couldn't pray. So they had to divide it, which I hate they did that. So you have the men's side and you have the women's side. And people go there and pray. So I kept thinking, people go there to pray, and the other thing they do, this is that you write little prayers on little pieces of paper and you stuff them into the cracks in the wall. And some of you have done this, and someone may have even done this for you. So every time I go there, I try to think through, who am I going to put a prayer in? And I let them know, your name is now in the Wailing Wall. It's a big deal. So in my mind, though, I had just come from the Bethlehem Wall with the graffiti, and I started asking myself, what is that graffiti? Maybe that graffiti is kind of a prayer, right? If you scrawl something on a wall and it's an image of peace where there is no peace, it's a prayer for peace. What was it that, if I only had a brain. The senator from Georgia, pastor. Raphael Warnock, yes. He said this thing. I actually said this years ago, but he said it better. He said, a vote is a kind of prayer for the world that you hope will come to be. Like, I love that, right? So it's a prayer A vote is a prayer. Prayers go into this wall. Graffiti is a kind of prayer for peace. So I'm trying to tie this. How do I tie this back to what's going on in our world? And my mind just gravitates to these things. If you know the Sue Monk Kidd novel, The Secret Life of Bees, which is one of the great books ever, there are sisters there who are named April and May. And April dies, and May is left, and she just can't get over her grief. And Sue Monk Kidd describes it beautifully, is that May is the kind of person that she feels the pains of the world. She would hear about a neighbor that was sick, and she would just sob. She would hear a news story, and it would just cause her to double over with pain. And her family tried to, distract her. They didn't know what they could do. She just felt so much pain all the time over so much that was going on in the world. So all they could think of to do, this is a clip from the movie that they made, is they built a wailing wall in their backyard so that whenever something happened, she could write it on a piece of paper and she could put it in that wall. You know what we have here at our church? Have you seen it downstairs? We have a prayer wall. So to tie all these walls together, it's kind of cool. You can say, well, we have a prayer wall. We hope that God will listen to our prayers. But I like the idea that we have a wall, like May had a wall, like there's a wall in Jerusalem. Jesus would have walked right along that wall. He had touched it. He prayed at that wall. And then there's now a wall in Bethlehem where Jesus, the Prince of Peace, was born. Reflecting on all of that together, and that we're part of something bigger than ourselves when this sort of thing happens. A couple other things I would mention. In Norwich, in England, southeastern England, I met a woman here in Charlotte. This is kind of funny. She was a secretary, and she clearly had a British accent. I said, where are you from? She said, a place you've never heard of. I said, yeah, where are you from? She said, it's southeast England. You've never heard of it. I said, tell me. She said, I'm from Norwich. I said, I've been there. I loved it. I could do that. It was fun. So in Norwich, there's this great cathedral that dates back to the Middle Ages, and Norwich is famous in church circles, apart from the church, because there was a woman in the 14th century named Julian of Norwich. And she was a great saint and prayer, and she lived the last 40 years of her life in one room. It's been rebuilt a bunch of times, but just one room. She lived behind these walls. She never went out. They brought food into her. And she was just a great prayer. So here's someone living within walls. I always called her the patron saint of the pandemic, right? During the pandemic, we were shut in, but we could pray. I told you on Sunday about my friend Philip, who has colon cancer. And people say, what would you do the last year of your life? Oh, I travel. I do family and friends. He can't travel. It's hard to field family and friends. But he wrote to me and said, I can still pray. Behind walls, you can still pray. Here's the one cell where she lived for 40 years in this one place, just in prayer. Prayers for the world, prayers for people who would come by and make supplication near her. It's a beautiful thing. I might just skip this. This is getting too long. I'll tell this story later. I'll do that now, actually. So there's a chapter in my book on home. This is one of the James Howell childhood homes in Columbia, South Carolina. The people who bought the house since we lived there have clearly not cared for the yard as they should have. It's fine. I used to mow it and keep it looking really good when I lived there. And I know some of you heard the story, but I like to repeat it. One day I was in Columbia, and I decided to go by the house, and I was going to try to get a photo of it. And so I pull up in the car, and I've got I'm ready to take the photo, and there's a woman who's come out, and she's standing here, watching me. She's probably thinking, creeper, criminal, casing. So I said, I should say something. I said, oh, sorry. I said, my name's James Howell. I used to live here. And she said, oh, we bought this house from your parents. I'm like, oh, really? She said, would you like to come in? Well, yeah. So I go in, and I'm looking around. They've made a few changes, but the house is pretty much the way it was. And then I just loved this. She said, would you like to go to your room? It was just funny. Like my mother used to say, would you like to go to your room? So I said, yes. So I go down the hall, and I turn left, and I go into my room, and I'm standing there. This woman was great. So I'm looking around, and she comes to the door, and she says, could I bring you some milk and cookies? It was just like a wow. So I'm in a home. It's not my home anymore, but there's something about a home where you were a child that stirs up something in you. You could say whatever that is for you. So I thought about homes. Jesus grew up in a home in Nazareth. They've not found the home where Jesus lived, but there's a warren of homes that go back to the time of Jesus. Maybe in one of those, it was his neighborhood, small town at the time. So thinking about Jesus lived in a place, in a home that was resonant with memory. You may recall that when Jesus grew up, the people from his home did not understand him and nearly killed him. So what do we do with home? What do we do with our legacy? What do we do with our ancestors? So this made me think about sort of ancestral homes. That photo didn't come out real well. So Lisa and I took a trip a couple of years ago to Princeton, New Jersey. Lisa has ancestors who lived there in Princeton. One of them is buried here. An ancestor of Lisa's here with her cousin Wendy, their dad's twin brothers. Ancestors in the Stockton family. One of them named Richard Stockton signed the Declaration of Independence, and he's buried in this little cemetery here. That's kind of cool. And then there's another city in town with the other Stocktons that are buried there. There's a house there. I used to go to a meeting in Princeton, and I would sit in this meeting. It was across the street at Princeton University. And I would get bored, and I would look out the window, and there was this house across the street. And I kept thinking, I need to go see what that house is one day. And so one day at lunch break, I walked over there, and it's a house that is called Morven. And Morven was the home of the Stocktons who lived there. So I took Lisa back to see this, which is great. What's fascinating about the Stocktons, Lisa, I hope it's okay if I talk about this. It's too late because I'm already into it now. One of the famous Stocktons there is this guy, the Commodore Stockton, right? The Commodore. And he was famous for various reasons. He created Liberia. So, people decided they didn't like having black people in America, and one of the plans was, let's send them back to Africa. And so they worked it out to purchase land, and they began to repatriate some blacks from America. This is in the early 1800s. It's why when you go to Liberia today, everybody speaks English. They have pictures of George Washington. They feel like they're sort of part of America. I preached in Liberia. This is amazing. And I told them the story. I said, yeah, my wife's kin to the guy that founded Liberia. They stood and applauded. And I wanted to say, they did it because they didn't like you guys. They wanted to get rid of you guys. But I just let it go. Anyway, what's interesting about these people, and actually the ancestors in most of our families, including the Howells, who were never wealthy people at all, is that these people were slave owners. And Lisa and I have gotten Lisa especially, has gotten interested in this. We tend to think about family, home, legacy, who are your ancestors, as people love to do. You get your blood tested, and you can figure out who you're kin to, and who are your ancestors. It's just so much fun to do all of this. What we've gotten interested in is what were those people like? What did they do? And we found, not surprising, that we have ancestors who owned slaves. And that's kind of interesting. And so some of you may have been to the program. Lisa and I have a friend who lives down the street from us named Dee Kirkpatrick. And Dee went to Myers Park High School and was in class with a guy named Jimmy Kirkpatrick, who was one of the first black kids to go to a white school in Charlotte. And Jimmy was a big football star, but there was so much racism here, he just left the South and he moved to the Northwest, where he's lived the rest of his life. But Jimmy the black one, started doing genealogical research, and he traced his ancestors, and he realized that his ancestor, Kirkpatrick, where did he get the name? Well, he was enslaved to somebody named Kirkpatrick. That's how that went in those days. And he found that his ancestor was enslaved to D. Kirkpatrick's ancestor. So he calls D and says, hey, have I got something to tell you? And so they got together, and it's a cool story. If you haven't tracked this, Dee and Jimmy are best friends now. And if I say that, you think that they're like, for public purposes, they're best friends. No. They vacation together. Their kids are ushers and bridesmaids in each other's weddings. What a fabulous story. So who are not just your ancestors, but were there people that they enslaved? And then, like, what we'd love to find is the equivalent of Jimmy, right? And we haven't succeeded yet. But there's a cemetery in Winston-Salem called the Old Fellows Cemetery, where slaves and the blacks after the Civil War were buried. And we've hunted there. Oh, my slides aren't good today. Lisa, tell about this stone since you're here. You can tell it better than I can.
So we found that one of the three formerly enslaved people took stock. Our family name as her last name. And so because of that, we were able to trace one of her children and found her marriage certificate and death certificate, and she married a Moss. And they had 3 kids, and one of their kids we found marriage certificate, death certificate, married to Davis. And so we knew that they were buried in this cemetery. And so I contacted the folks that were restoring the cemetery, and Wendy and some other cousins went out and started helping to clean up and found this stone. And so we've gone out there several times to help clean up the cemeteries.
So I've always been obsessed with cemeteries. They're places of sorrow, if you think about it. We tend to mark places of sorrow. This is kind of a church specialty. We mark places of sorrow. The world doesn't know what to do with sorrow, but we do. We can bring dignity to sorrow. So when we go on mission trips to Armenia, we go to the Armenian Genocide Memorial. Everybody knows about the Holocaust and the Jews that were killed. Millions of Armenians were killed a few decades before that. Just a wholesale slaughter. Nobody in the world's paid attention to it. In fact, when Hitler started the Holocaust of the Jews, some people questioned this and said, don't you think the world will rise up? He said, nobody cared about the Armenians. Like, that's the example that he used for why it was okay to slaughter Jews, and no one would really do anything. You go to Yad Vashem. I want to play the video, but pause it for a second before we start. Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. Not surprisingly, it's the greatest of all the Holocaust museums and memorials. And there's so much that's fabulous about it, but if you ever get a chance to go there, don't miss this. They have a children's memorial. That's the kind of thing I might want to skip, because a lot of places they have a children's thing that's like, oh, here's a little child, they have their suitcase, and it's like kid-oriented. At Yad Vashem, the children's memorial is nothing like this, and I shot a video last time that I was there to show you what it's like, so let's play that. So this is the entrance. So you enter this room, and it's totally dark, except there are 2 candles, but then a whole network of mirrors and glass that cast all of this light around. And as you walk through, there's no sound, except someone is reading the names of children who were killed in the Holocaust. And they give the name, their age, and the country they're from. And when I was there with our teenagers, as we walked through, it was just luck, whatever. They were reading names of children from Ukraine who were killed during the Holocaust. So it's so elegant. There are places of sorrow. Like there's no happy story here. There's not a happy ending here, right? We just mark sorrow and loss. Down in Alabama, there's a similar thing, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Some people call it the Lynching Museum. They have all of these monoliths that are hanging there, and there's one for each county where there were lynchings. And it's got names and numbers of people that were lynched. Well, here's Mecklenburg County. This happened right here. I had the great blessing of walking through there with my friend and our church member, Richard Harrison, whom some of you may remember. Richard died during COVID unexpectedly. And what Richard had done is he had reached out to family members and to try to find the names and locations of people that the people in his family had known who were lynched and where they were lynched. And so we walked and we found each one of those monoliths. And Richard wept. I wept. Beautiful moment. Many would say that wow, it'd sure be better to go to a resort in Hawaii and have fun instead of going to such a place. I'd argue with that person every time. There's something for the soul, there's something for the good of the world, there's something for the future of the world when we can visit such places and absorb what is there and be changed by it. So one of the reasons that I wrote this book, you may not get to all of these places, but they are there and they matter. Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem is such a place. We go into the church and you go to Calvary. This is where Christ was crucified. Of course, they built a gaudy, ornate altar over where Christ's cross would have been. And then housed inside the same church is this little building inside the larger building called the Edicule. And this is built over the tomb where Christ was buried. Places of sorrow, they matter for us, and they change everything in how we think. So I try to write a book just reflecting on places that I've been that matter, whether it's, if you think about Palm Sunday, Jesus walked up as steep a hill as that hill to San Damiano, right? So just the arduous nature of that. Location matters. It mattered for Jesus where he was. He was in Samaria. It was hot in the middle of the day. Location matters, but then there are other locations that mirror that, whether it's in Italy or down in Alabama or right here in Charlotte. Anyway, that was kind of the thesis of my book, and if you read it, I hope you will like it. But more importantly, be blessed by it and think about things in your life. I didn't write it to be an entertaining book. I wrote it to be a book that might help us be holier and closer to God and to the people of God. So, okay. Got a little scattered rambling, but thank you for coming and listening.